That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we had a great week in week 3. We're going to continue to put in that work throughout the entire season to make sure that we're going through and dominating these leagues. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell next to the subscribe button. Y'all know we're going to be live streaming every single night as well, so I can answer as many questions as possible. But one way I answer a ridiculous amount of questions is actually through the YouTube comment section. So we're going to be pulling up our last YouTube video real quick before we get to these sell high running backs. And we're going to be picking 2 random comments to give Fantasy Flock Network hats away from. And our first one going to come out from Nick Navas, who says, "You've won me 2 of the first 3 weeks in my fantasy league. Thanks so much for the continuous grind to put out content for all of us fantasy lovers. Much love, Mason." My friend, thank you so much for the kind words. And you just won a Fantasy Flock Network hat. And our next hat going away from Diet Powerade, someone that we have seen out in a considerable amount of live streams so far. He says, "Been carrying my season thus far. Thanks, Mason." No, my friend, thank you so much for always coming out to those live streams, hanging out with us. So yeah, all you have to do is go to the description of the video, and if you won that Fantasy Flock Network hat, so I'm just speaking to YouTube people right now, send me your address through the email that's in the description of the video. And if you want to get entered in to win a Fantasy Flock Network hat, make sure you go through and just drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And yeah, that should be it. Let's go through and let's talk about some of these sell high running backs. But a fair warning here, I am never the guy to come out and say, oh, you got to sell high on Leonard Fournette. Oh, you got to sell high on a bum running back that nobody's going to trade you anything for. I'm going to have some names on this list that people are excited about. I'm going to have some names on this list that people want to come out. They want to say, oh my God, they're taking over. We finally found this gold. And I'm saying, you know what? I think we can use this excitement. We can trade this hot player right now. We can get to a cornerstone asset that we're more excited about for the long term. So I'm going to be talking about some guys that you're probably excited about. And if you disagree with me, let me know why. And our first guy is going to be Clyde EdwardsHelaire. And I know, trust me, I know, so many people are going to be saying, well, Mason, you just called Clyde EdwardsHelaire a buy low. How the hell are you saying that he's a sell high right now? Well, a couple things are happening here. His value has just risen to a point where, it's right back to where he was going in drafts this year. I think you can get a nice price tag for him. And, don't get mad at me for calling him a buy low one week, then a sell high the next week. Be happy with me now that we can actually make that profit and flip him after that production. And I called Clyde EdwardsHelaire a must-start running back this past week. This was someone in the live streams. We were identifying the matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers as a great spot to play Clyde EdwardsHelaire, understanding that this is a Chargers defense that prioritizes allowing the other team to establish the run, and instead they focus in on shutting down the pass. We saw this against the Dallas Cowboys in week 2. We saw this with them allowing both Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott to combine for like 220, 230 total yards in week 2. So we said Clyde EdwardsHelaire, this is a great spot for him. Be playing him in your week 3 matchup. He comes out 17 carries, 100 rushing yards. This is like the first time he's had 100 yards, and I don't know how long. 2 receptions, 9 receiving yards, and a touchdown to go along with it. Now, with Clyde EdwardsHelaire, I will say, while it was a great day for his fantasy production, I am less excited about Clyde EdwardsHelaire after this performance than where I stood just a week ago. Because y'all know we identified him as that buy low candidate based on the offense that he's playing in, and also the usage that he had in that offense, where he was seeing almost every single touch out of the backfield, where in like week 1, he came out, he had like 15, 16, actually no, he had 17 because he had 14 carries and he had 3 receptions out of the backfield in week 1. So he had 17 touches in week 1, where the next best running back had 1 touch out of that backfield. So after a statement like that, where he is that bell cow running back, all of a sudden he's someone that you want to be jamming in your lineup. You want to be buying him low. But he comes out and splits this backfield with Darrell Williams. Darrell Williams, of course, not a 50-50 running back with Clyde EdwardsHelaire, but he is taking a considerable amount of touches here, where Darrell Williams comes out. He gets 7 carries and 2 receptions this game. So all of a sudden, you're actually seeing Darrell Williams get some usage in this Kansas City Chiefs offense, which makes it where we go, okay, well, if Clyde EdwardsHelaire had a very hard time being productive when he was the only running back in Kansas City that was getting any work at all, now that they're implementing another running back in here with Darrell Williams, maybe this is a spot where we just take the massive performance that he had against the Los Angeles Chargers. We try to sell him off for a profit somewhere else in our starting lineup. We'll have a video coming out later today about some trade targets, some buy low opportunities that I think you'll have with other players. And here, I will say, one other thing that we have to be concerned with Clyde EdwardsHelaire is this is back-to-back week with a fumble. And I'm not saying this because like we're, oh my God, and we lose so many points for a fumble. No, that's not what it is at all. It's more so, at what point is Andy Reid going to draw that line in the sand and say, you know what, Clyde, I mean, this was the last fumble. This is the last straw on the camel's back. I mean, we have to go through. We have to look for another option. You can't be seeing 15 plus touches every single week because obviously he essentially did lose the game for them in week 2 against the Baltimore Ravens with that fumble. And now, I mean, he was one of those players that cost them not the entire game, but cost them a drive with a costly fumble this past week. So I do want to keep that in the back of our minds as well. So Clyde EdwardsHelaire is going to be a player that I think, yes, he was on our buy low video. So I know that a lot of people are going to hate me going back and forth, but I mean, don't hate me. Be happy that you can sell him for a profit now. Now, our next running back is going to be James Robinson, another player that a lot of people are excited about. Yes, people who drafted James Robinson coming into this year are finally getting the production that they're looking for, where he comes out, he gets 15 carries, 88 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown to go along with it. And I will acknowledge something that's very exciting with James Robinson is the fact that he gets 6 receptions out of this backfield, 46 receiving yards at the same time. That's the main thing I want to focus in here with James Robinson. If you're going to try to make a bullish case for him, if you're going to try to have just a strong take where you're saying, Mason, you're an idiot, we should never be looking to sell James Robinson at this point. I mean, I think a strong argument to be made is that he is the only running back at all that's getting used in the receiving game. Now, what I will say is I think that too many people are overlooking the fact that this running back backfield at this point, if you're looking at the rushing usage, I mean, it's still pretty close between James Robinson and Carlos Hyde. We actually look at Carlos Hyde this past week. He gets 8 carries, 44 rushing yards to go along with it. So far through 3 weeks, I mean, you've had James Robinson here with 31 carries this season and Carlos Hyde with 19. So I know that, I mean, you're not necessarily seeing Carlos Hyde get a ton of the valuable touches, which is something we talk about a lot. And I'll be the first person to admit, as long as you are confident that James Robinson is going to have the goal line role safely secured in Jacksonville, I think having James Robinson here is no issue at all because you know that he's going to get the targets out of the backfield. And what do we talk about all the time from a fantasy football standpoint? One of the reasons that we were drafting DeAndre Swift when everybody else was scared is we were saying, hell, I mean, it doesn't matter if Jamal Williams is getting some carries in this offense, as long as you have it as a scenario where DeAndre Swift is getting every target out of the backfield and the usage in the red zone. So it's very possible you are getting the same type of utilization for James Robinson. And if Carlos Hyde still continues to get just say 40% of the running back carries here, I'm not going to really care if they are between the 20-yard lines. Now, I think it's too small of a sample just to safely assume that James Robinson does have this red zone role on lock. So it's up to you here. I'm not saying that you have to sell James Robinson, but if you are concerned at all that Carlos Hyde could begin to get some more run in the red zone, that's where I think we have to all of a sudden be a little bit concerned. But if Carlos Hyde is only going to get the carries between the 20s, it's not going to be a massive deal. So I want to be making sure that we're monitoring over the next few weeks the touches inside the 10-yard line. I think that's going to be very important for the value of James Robinson and exactly what Carlos Hyde is taking away from him. Now, our next running back, I have to admit, we are taking a pretty big L here. Okay, we are taking a big L. Jonathan Taylor, a player that I loved at the end of the first round, the beginning of second rounds in NFL drafts, in fantasy football drafts this season. Now, you're looking at him coming off a performance where he had 10 carries, 64 rushing yards, only 1 reception out of the backfield for 8 receiving yards to go along with it. And of course, his value is currently trending in the wrong direction. Now, I will say, very rarely are we looking to abandon ship on a player that is an elite talent like Jonathan Taylor, a player that, I mean, we know is just significantly better from a talent perspective than a running back that you would trade him for. However, to look at this situation right now with Indianapolis, it is currently falling apart. Now, something we talked a lot about from a dynasty fantasy football perspective this offseason is understanding the worst case in the range of outcomes for this Indianapolis Colts offense. And that worst case was what happens if this Colts offense and Carson Wentz, they're significantly worse than most people expect. Because we know that if you look at that deal that you actually had between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Indianapolis Colts, the Colts trade a first-round pick to go get Carson Wentz. However, if Carson Wentz does not play 75% of the offensive snaps for Indianapolis this year, that pick turns into a second rounder. And as of now, the Indianapolis Colts are 0-3. They are 0-3 right now, and they look horrendous. And what is adding fuel to this fire? Quentin Nelson. I mean, I would make the argument, Quentin Nelson, maybe the best offensive player, maybe the best player on this entire roster, is now getting carted off in week 3. Reports are saying that he has a high ankle sprain. I know that some reports are saying he could come back in 4 weeks. No, a high ankle sprain, this is something you have to be worried about that's going to continue to linger. This is something added on to the injury that he suffered, in the preseason. All of a sudden, this offensive line went from being one of the best offensive lines in football to losing the, I want to say the best offensive lineman in football. We know Quentin Nelson is that guy. And if he's going to be gone now, what happens if the Indianapolis Colts, by the time we get to week 8, they're sitting at 2-6, they're sitting at 1-7, which is not out of the range of outcomes at this point. And then all of a sudden they go, okay, well, we can't be giving up a top 3 pick to the Philadelphia Eagles for trading Carson Wentz. So all of a sudden, we're just going to have to bench Carson Wentz. We have no other option, so we can save that top 3 pick, because obviously a top 3 pick is a franchise-changing player. You saw this with the 49ers being willing to trade the 12th, their future first, and an additional future first-round pick. So 3 first just for that top 3 pick. And I think you could be in a world where the Indianapolis Colts have to protect that, so they have to bench Carson Wentz. And all of a sudden, you just see this team turning into one of the worst teams in the NFL. And I know, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that it's in the range of outcomes, and it's something we have to at least discuss, especially with the Quentin Nelson injury. So Jonathan Taylor, I love the running back talent. I think he's one of the most talented running backs in the entire NFL. But with that being said, I think we have to look to sell. And the problem is you're not going to be getting the same level of value that you would have gotten just a few weeks ago. And I was drafting him at the end of the first, the beginning of the second. I think now you're going to have to look to sell for a player that was going maybe in the DeAndre Swift range, because things are looking really bad right now in Indianapolis. Now, our next running back is someone that's going to be way lower down rankings than this. Let's go with James Conner here. Now, with James Conner, he comes out a great week today from a fantasy football standpoint, but his role has not changed at all. What have we said with James Conner in fantasy drafts? What did we say about him when people were asking if he should cut him coming into this week? No, James Conner is a running back that is looking like he is just a complimentary player to Chase Edmonds. But the thing with James Conner is he's going to have the goal line role. And that's the one reason that you actually had Chase Edmonds not profiling to be Aaron Jones, not profiling to be Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swift this year, because James Conner was going to be taking those high value touches inside the 5. Now, James Conner this week does come away with 11 carries, 43 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, only 1 target out of the backfield. And this is the main thing I want to be focusing in on here, where Chase Edmonds, his production this week didn't go anywhere. Chase Edmonds had a very strong week from his own perspective, where he gets 11 carries, so he ties James Conner with carries. But more importantly, he gets 7 receptions out of this backfield. He is taking up everything in the receiving game. And the problem with James Conner here is if you told me that I'm going to get the goal line running back on one of the league's, if not the league's best offense, I'm going to be very excited about that. But we know, based on what we have seen with Kyler Murray from 2019, more importantly from 2020 and 2021, that Kyler Murray is going to get a significant amount of those rushing touchdowns at the goal line himself. He's going to be vulturing them away from James Conner, that goal line running back. So if all of a sudden people are viewing James Conner as someone that they can go out there and start, if for some reason, you're playing with people that don't necessarily know what they're doing, and all of a sudden they just think that James Conner's the running back 1 in Arizona because all they're paying attention to is fantasy points, then I think that's going to be a clear sell high. Now, the easiest sell high this entire week, because James Robinson, I only want to sell him if you're worried about the goal line role. Here with Jonathan Taylor, we want to sell him because his team situation. But a player that I was drafting right there with Jonathan Taylor. This was someone I was drafting at the beginning of the second round consistently. Antonio Gibson coming out with a very bad week. So y'all know I told everybody to start Antonio Gibson this past week just based on the talent that he is with the guaranteed touches he has in this offense. And I was telling everybody to hold on to him after his Thursday night performance where J.D. McKissic got all the usage in the receiving game as well. But at this point, I think this is the last chance, or at least one of the last chances, that you're going to have to sell Antonio Gibson at a very high price tag, because he comes out very disappointing with his opportunity. He gets 12 carries, 31 rushing yards, and he has 1 reception out of this backfield. So you're hearing, oh, he had 12 carries, 31 rushing yards, and only 1 reception. This is someone that had a very disappointing week. I mean, we can't rely on him going forward. Well, what if I told you that 1 reception out of the backfield was a 73-yard touchdown reception? So that reception alone, I mean, accounts for just 15 fantasy points this week, which makes it look like Antonio Gibson had a great week against a tough defense. And of course, a lot of people are going to be reading into this, but you only need to find one sucker in your league that's going to convince themselves that all of a sudden J.D. McKissic's no longer viable in this offense, that Antonio Gibson is going to take this role, which I was that sucker coming into the year. I was that sucker looking at Antonio Gibson going, well, he has that elite athletic profile combined with the fact this is someone that was a receiver in college. We know that he can catch the ball out of the backfield. I mean, maybe he takes that role from J.D. McKissic. I was telling myself that story, and I think that we honestly kind of see the ceiling that Antonio Gibson would have if he was able to take that over. But right now, with how he's getting used in one of the worst offenses in football at the same time, he's just someone we cannot be excited about. So I hate to put 2 of my guys on this video. I hate to put both Jonathan Taylor and Antonio Gibson, 2020 running backs that have a ton of talent, that are freak athletes, that have prototypical size. But it's just not going to be their year. It's just not going to be the year with the Indianapolis Colts falling apart and with Antonio Gibson just not getting the role that we were looking for. Now, our next running back on this team is going to be Trey Sermon. So here with Trey Sermon, obviously you're not having a very high asking price for Trey Sermon, but what was very telling is you look at this San Francisco 49ers backfield going into Sunday night and you go, okay, well, there is only literally 1 active running back on this roster. There's only 1 guy that's going to be able to get any touches. Fire up Trey Sermon. And I told everybody to bench Trey Sermon. I said, I mean, based on what Kyle Shanahan had told us through the first 2 weeks by making Trey Sermon inactive in week 1, then having him as the backup running back behind both Elijah Mitchell and JaMarr Chase in week 2, that this is someone that we can probably just learn from that and go, well, it doesn't matter what we thought about him coming into the NFL draft, I guess. I mean, he's just not nearly as talented as we wanted to believe. And so he comes in as really the only active for the 49ers. And yes, he has a decent day with his fantasy production because he does have a rushing touchdown. So he comes away with 10 carries, 31 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 2 receptions, and 3 receiving yards at the same time. But if you're looking at how the 49ers went through and handled this game, they were doing everything that they could to get away from Trey Sermon here. I know that this is a team that always gets the ball to their skill positional players in a creative way. I know you always see some Deebo Samuel jet sweeps out of the backfield, but I mean, you had Deebo Samuel getting these handoffs. You had Brandon Ayuk getting these handoffs. You had George Kittle getting these handoffs. They didn't have any running backs, but they were trying to still establish the running game with anybody besides Trey Sermon. So now we're looking at it saying, if Sermon can't take over this backfield when he is literally the only player here, the only guy here, I mean, they're getting Kyle Juszczyk the ball significantly. What is his real upside? And trust me, I like Trey Sermon coming into this year because y'all know I was someone who hated Raheem Mostert based on his injury history and his lack of ability to handle a full workload. So I have Sermon in a lot of spots. What I can guarantee you, I'm going to go through and try to sell him high because maybe just someone tries to convince himself that he is all of a sudden a lead running back for the San Francisco 49ers. I just don't think we can trust that. Now, our last player on this list is not going to be a running back, but I want to put him on here, talk about him just briefly. I don't even think that he's a must sell high player, but he is someone that I think we can begin to think about selling high, and this will be JaMarr Chase. Now, with JaMarr Chase, he was fantastic this past week, and we told everybody who asked JaMarr Chase or player X, JaMarr Chase or player X, every single answer was JaMarr Chase, JaMarr Chase, JaMarr Chase as soon as we hear that T. Higgins is out this game. Now, with T. Higgins being out, I mean, you still see JaMarr Chase coming out here and crushing. And I know that a lot of people think I'm going to talk about the fact that he only had 5 targets, yada, yada, yada. No, 5 targets was just fine considering the fact that this Cincinnati Bengals team did not throw the ball at all. They actually had more rushing attempts than they had passing attempts. So from a market share perspective, you actually had JaMarr Chase just exactly in line with what you should expect. It was a completely fine week for him. But just from an overall standpoint of T. Higgins coming back to this offense and us knowing exactly how talented T. Higgins is, I think it would be very hard to just go through and confidently rely on JaMarr Chase turning into this alpha wide receiver 1. I think right now a lot of people are looking at a Justin Jefferson level just explosion. And with the video that we have coming out later today, I think there'll be some more buy low wide receivers that are just bona fide studs that could be slightly more appealing. Now, thank you. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Make sure y'all go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, letting me know how stupid I am. Subscribe to the channel, most importantly. And yeah, once you leave that comment, subscribe to the channel, drop that like, you get entered to win a Fantasy Flock Network hat. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all, and have a great day.